The Last of Us is a loved game, no doubt about it. Boasting an incredible score of 95 on Metacritic, it's clear that something about The Last of Us connects with people. The terrifying infected, the tense gameplay, the beautiful environments, the haunting music, and the compelling world all play major roles in why people love The Last of Us. But if you were to ask any fan what the point of The Last of Us was, they would more than likely say it's all about Joel and Ellie. The two main characters of the game and their relationship is a major feature of the game's story, and in turn touched everyone who played The Last of Us. While I do think the point of the game was to follow Joel and Ellie's story, I also think there's much more to The Last of Us than just Joel and Ellie. Joel and Ellie might be part of the point, but they're by no means the whole blade. Join me today while I revisit and explore what made The Last of Us Part 1 so good, while at the same time digging down and finding out what the core of The Last of Us really is. First off, we must establish something. Joel is the main character. Wow, I know, what a hot take. The character you play as for 90% of the game is the main character. The reason why I say that is because while the game is about Joel and Ellie, the main focus is on Joel. Ellie is no doubt a major character, and the relationship the two gain is a major focus of the game. But Ellie is not the main character of Part 1. I guess an easier way to say this is Joel is the protagonist. The focus of the game is Joel's change through his relationship with Ellie. I know that's nothing groundbreaking, but I feel like it's an important distinction to make. Just keep that idea in the back of your head as we continue to explore the rest of The Last of Us Part 1. We will be exploring all of The Last of Us Part 1, so be warned, there are major spoilers for Part 1 of The Last of Us. In order to really find what the core of The Last of Us is, we're going to have to talk about what makes it so good in the first place. And honestly, the moment that best sums up the quality that drips from The Last of Us Part 1 is actually the game's opening sequence. The first section in The Last of Us has you play through the start of the outbreak. Joel is living his happy life with his daughter when the virus appears. The outbreak reaches Joel's area and Joel gets the fuck out of there with Tommy's help. I've played this section before. I knew what was coming and I knew who would live and who would die. Despite this, I was still very on edge the entire sequence. Even though I knew the ending, I still found myself overwhelmingly anxious watching Joel and Tommy try to make it through the commotion. Now this applies to the entire game, but the music does an incredible job at adding to all of these scenes. Even if you haven't played The Last of Us, you know the main theme. On top of the incredible theme, much of the music focuses on haunting and lonely guitar melodies that really amplify the tone of the entire game. I can't and won't bring this up in every section, but I can't make a video on The Last of Us and not mention the incredible score. Not only does this opening sequence do an incredible job at setting a great tone that puts the player on edge, but it also wastes no time. The game starts and sets up that Joel is happy and that he loves his daughter. Then the outbreak starts. It's impossible to get bored before the story starts. There is one other event that I must talk about when it comes to the opening of the game. The moment when Joel's daughter dies is so brutal. You've been playing for about 15 minutes at this point, and the gameplay has been on a slow burn, getting progressively more intense when you run into a soldier. Joel tries to convince the man to let him and his hurt daughter through, but the soldier gets orders to take them out in case they're infected. The soldier fires and hits the pair and comes to finish them off when Tommy takes him out. Joel thanks his brother and looks at his daughter, who is shaking and bleeding everywhere. It's a really brutal moment because it's not dramatized at all. Joel's daughter gurgles and gags and then is gone. No big moment or dramatized scene, just a quick bullet to the gut and then death. Even on my second playthrough, I was crying like a bitch after his daughter dies. This is the opening to Last of Us Part 1. Very, very great opening. On top of being fantastic, the opening does one other important thing, and that's showing us who Joel used to be. We get to see Joel before the outbreak. He's much nicer and has a warmth around him. The Joel we meet right after the opening, but many years later, is much gruffer, less patient, and overall a meaner guy. 2 decades of fighting infected will do that to you, but it's not all because of the outbreak, and Ellie will be proof of that. When we catch up to Joel at the real start of the game, he's living in Boston inside the quarantine zone. He works with his business partner Tess, and together the pair does smuggling jobs. Sometimes guns, sometimes outside gear, but it's always illegal. The city of Boston is in ruin. It's ruled by a very authoritarian military that's run by what's left of the government. Joel and Tess mainly get paid and pay in ration cards. Unfortunately, even a ration card can't guarantee you food in this world. While playing the game, you can hear some of the survivors complain that it's another half ration day. life is not easy to say the least. To make things a bit more complicated, the rebel group the Fireflies have been causing issues inside of the city. Recently, Tess and Joel got some weapons they were going to sell stolen from them, so they go to get them back. This is where the actual first encounters of the game are. Once you complete them, Joel and Tess reach the guy who stole their guns. He sold them off to the Fireflies, so Tess caps him. Well, turns out the Fireflies really needed that guy to smuggle something out of the city. They offer to give back all the guns plus some if Joel and Tess take the job. Reluctantly, they take it. Well, turns out that cargo is a young girl, 14-year-old Ellie. As they carry on with the job, they come to learn that Ellie was bit a few weeks back, but she never turned. She's immune. The pair quickly come to understand the gravity of their mission. They have to get Ellie to a large building just outside of the city. Issue is, once they get there, all the Fireflies are dead and Tess gets bit. It's now just Joel and Ellie as they sneak away from the Boston police. Tess buys them a little bit of time and goes down in a hail of bullets. And that's the first main section of the game. So what can we learn from this? Well, this section most definitely serves as our introduction to the world and themes of The Last of Us. We see people starving and struggling, people fighting and killing, military abusing citizens, gunfire fills the streets, and food is scarce inside the city walls. In short, living inside the quarantine zone isn't really better than living outside the walls. Society has collapsed. What's left is an authoritarian hellhole filled with crime. No matter if you're in the criminal underground, a military member, or even a government official, you're going to struggle to survive even in the city. The Last of Us takes great care to show you that everyone is in the same boat. The soldiers, the Fireflies, and the citizens that live around and work with both groups are all faced with the same reality. Each group ruthlessly fights with the other, killing almost nonchalantly with no clear good or bad guy. Just people fighting to survive. People inside of the city are rough and mistrusting because the world has forced them into this hell. Joel and Tess are no different. While occasionally some warmth is shared between the smuggling duo due to their history, the two are almost instantly aggressive or hostile with anyone else in the city. Even with Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, who they're somewhat familiar with, they really don't trust, and in turn, she doesn't trust them back. This world is really dog-eat-dog. The second notable thing about this section is, of course, Tess's death. Tess only chooses to go out in a blaze of glory because she already got bit. Tess is aware of Ellie's immunity before she dies, and her final wish is for Joel to take her to the Fireflies. Joel at this point was more than ready to ditch Ellie and split. In this exact instant, he probably wouldn't just leave her, but with the Fireflies they were supposed to deliver her to dead, Joel wants to offload this cargo. He really couldn't give two shits about saving humanity. He's already occupied with surviving his everyday life. But due to his friend's dying wish and the advancing police force, Joel pushes his reservations aside. He doesn't exactly accept Tess's hope for humanity, but he does at least accept her wish. This is the first section of the game, so a lot of setup takes place here, and the themes of the story are no different. Some of the themes touched on are loss, violence, survival, hope, desperation, trust/not trusting others, and fear. Some themes are more present than others, but each theme has their place. These themes will be constantly present in The Last of Us. We will talk about them more in-depthly as we move on. So let's move on to Bill's bomb-filled town. Joel's goal is to get a car from Bill so he can make it to his brothers out in Jackson, Wyoming. Bill is the guy who works with Tess and Joel. He lives on the outside of the quarantine zone in a little town that he's laced with traps and bombs to keep himself from the infected. He lives on the outside of the quarantine zone in a little town that he's laced with traps and bombs to keep himself safe from the infected. Bill spends his days looting and then trading the loot back to Joel and Tess. He's the guy who will know how to get a car. You have to watch out for his bombs and shit while entering the town, but Joel doesn't avoid every trap. Joel gets caught in a rope trap and then has to shoot down all the infected rushing him and Ellie. Bill heard all the commotion and shows up to help the pair escape. Bill is a grumpy man, who, to be honest, reminded me a lot of Bobby from Supernatural. I actually wrote half of this section calling him Bobby and had to go back and fix it. Him and Ellie bicker and argue the entire section, and it's honestly really charming. The two most definitely don't like each other, but it's kind of nice to see that there is some sort of humor left in this world. Once the group makes it back to Bill's base of operations, they make a plan to get a working car battery from a recently crashed military vehicle to fix up a car. This section is notable because it holds your first encounter with a bloater. Bloaters are quite rare and not easy to take down. It's pretty much a boss fight. I remember my first time around struggling with this fight, but this time around I easily took the bloater out. This playthrough in general, I just had many more resources than the first time I played. It's not like because I played on an easier difficulty. Both times I've played have been on hard, but it's because I'm a better player now. I've played the game before and the sequel, so it makes sense that I would generally play better. Anyway, the mission was a bust. Kind of. The battery had already been looted by someone else. In the few weeks it sat there, the battery had already been looted by someone else. The school's also being rushed with infected, so the crew needs to get the fuck out. The house they hide in actually has the working battery in the garage. And another surprise. Bill's dead partner's swinging corpse is also in the building. Bill and the guy were partners, or in other words gay, and have had some fallings out recently. The partner split off and at some point tried to get the battery himself to fix up the car, and he did get the battery but got bit on the way out. So he hung himself before he could turn and left Bill a note that said "fuck you." Bill's pretty upset about seeing his dead boyfriend, but at the same time he hides it very well. In a world where you lose people all the time, there really is no time to mourn. When Tess was killed, Joel looked back, steeled himself, and moved on. Bill does the same. He even tells you to loot his partner's shit while he fixes the car. Finally, with the battery hooked up, Bill and Joel start pushing the car to get it going. The entire time, infected are moving at the group. This section is pretty fun. This encounter, like many others, does a great job of making the player feel anxious and rushed. After a few waves of infected, the car gets moving and Ellie starts it up while Bill and Joel jump in the back. Joel and Ellie shortly head out on their journey, and Ellie pulls out one of Bill's gay pornos, makes a dick joke, says she's gay, and throws it out the window. Joel and Ellie's chemistry here is great. It's one of the first moments you see the pair joke and really let their guards down a little bit with each other. Honestly, a great section to play through after a heavy moment like the death of Tess. It still has tense moments, and heavy ones too, but for the most part you're playing in bright and open areas until the sun sets. This section just generally feels like a break for a moment. Then you get to the school and things start to get spicy again. You get to fight a brand new enemy, and then on top of that, the building you escaped to has Bill's dead partner in it. Joel starts to take on more of that father-like figure when he has to babysit and mediate Bill and Ellie's childlike arguments. Ellie is also notably starting to trust Joel. She'll start to tease and poke fun at him on occasion. Bill is a brand new character for this section, and he is not a nice guy. He at least seems honest, seeing how he honors the favor that he owes Joel and helps them get the battery. It seems that the world has really beat Bill down over the years. He's not unique to that fact. Like we mentioned, Joel moved past Tess's death just as fast as Bill moved past the death of his partner Tony. This section shares many of the themes that the first section had: death, loss, violence, and the struggle to survive. On the surface, this section and Bill might just seem like another set piece and character for us to interact with. But come on, this is The Last of Us. The writers and creators of these games are trying to say something with each character. It's easy to see the story between Joel and Ellie, but with a lot of the characters, you really need to examine them in order to understand what The Last of Us is trying to say. I think it's easiest to see this in a full context, so we'll circle back once we've talked about some more of the side characters. For now, just keep Bill's story in the back of your mind. There is a point to his character and story. There's a reason the creators wrote Bill the way they did and gave him the story that they did. We'll talk about it. But in order to talk about it, we do need to talk about the other sections of the game. Once the pair have a working car, they're off on the highways where things go smoothly until they hit Pittsburgh. The road through the city is completely walled off. Instead of turning around and finding a new route around the city, Joel decides to exit and go into the city. Unfortunately, that was a trap. A gang of survivors had blocked off the road in order to force the occasional survivor to drive down into the city where they had a trap ready and waiting. Joel's able to get himself and Ellie out of the trap, but their car is wrecked and no longer an option. On top of that, they're trapped in Pittsburgh, otherwise known as Hell on Earth. This section of the game is mostly against human enemies. The gang has this town on a pretty good lockdown, so most of the threats faced here are human. There are a few infected encounters, and one of them is actually my favorite infected encounter in part 1 of The Last of Us. While making their way through the city, Joel and Ellie get separated. They're working their way through a series of hotels when they choose to take a path through an elevator shaft. Joel gets Ellie up through to the next floor, but all of the jostling they've caused causes the elevator cables to break. Joel falls down 3 to 4 levels and lands in the flooded basement. Before he can even think of getting back to Ellie, Joel must escape the basement. It's pitch black down there, and you're left to look around for a bit in the dark and dreary environment. After getting some resources, you'll come across the encounter. The encounter starts with a swarm of rats rushing Joel away from the hallway straight ahead of him. At this point, the hairs on the back of your neck start to stand up as you explore this dark area. It's pretty quiet down there, but you can occasionally hear the stalkers in the area running around in the dark. Stalkers are just infected runners, but much quieter. Eventually, while sneaking around the area, you'll find the generator. Once you start that generator, things get much harder. More runners appear, and so does a bloater. It's much harder to keep hidden at this point, and well, if you didn't find the key card you need to unlock the locked door, then you better hope you can find it before the runners find you. I really like this encounter. It's easy enough if you know what you're doing and you know where to go, but man, when you're going into this encounter blind, you really shit bricks. By the way, you can't get the key card and just not turn on the generator. The generator must be turned on in order to power the electric door lock and the card reader. The Last of Us always does an incredible job at setting the tone, but this encounter is just a perfect example of that. The creaks and little sounds you hear before you turn on the generator do a great job of putting you on edge. Plus, the two stalkers running around the area are great at that too. They're not a big threat or anything and are easy to avoid if you just pay attention to where they are, but the fact that you have to constantly use listen mode to see if they're close also adds to the tension. Once the generator is on, it gets loud. Runners appear that love to run around the area and seemingly at random. Their screams echo through that basement area, the loud thumps of the bloater's heavy steps when it's close, the hidden keycard you must find to unlock the door, the multi-step process it takes to open the door. Seriously, every detail of this encounter does such a great job of putting you as a player on edge. After this encounter, you must make your way through some more human encounters. During one of them, a bunch of quick time events come up during a hand-to-hand fight with a guy. He's drowning the shit out of Joel when Ellie takes his gun and caps his ass. Ellie had managed to find Joel in time to help him out with the situation. Joel's not really that grateful that Ellie just saved his life, at first. Shortly after, there's a short cutscene where Joel says thank you to Ellie in his own way. Joel still has a lot of barriers up, but Ellie's growing on him and he's starting to slowly let some down just a little bit. The other very notable part of Pittsburgh are the other survivors you team up with for the last half of the section. Henry and Sam. The pair are brothers, and like with most people in this world, they are all that each other have left. Henry is the older brother and the caretaker. Sam is the younger brother, and just like Ellie, was born into this hell world. The brothers were part of a group that went into the city. They have a planned meetup spot in time, but the brothers are pretty certain that most of their group's been killed trying to get through the city. Joel and Ellie join up with Henry and Sam because they're all trying to get to the group known as the Fireflies. After quite a crazy escape from the city, the four manage to get back together and work their way to the meetup spot. They move through the sewers where they encounter a lot of infected. Leaving a bunch of slaughtered infected behind them, the group makes it out and to the meetup spot. Unfortunately, no other members of the group made it out. Ellie and Sam get to bond a bit, and Joel and Henry chat and relate to their struggles as a caretaker in this world. Sadly, Sam did the classic bit where he gets bit and keeps it a secret. When everyone wakes up, Sam's turned and attacks the group, so Henry shoots him dead. The cruel, unforgiving world of The Last of Us has forced this man to shoot his own little brother. Henry can't take the reality of what's happening and turns the gun on himself, ending it all. On this horribly dark and graphic note, the Pittsburgh section ends. The Pittsburgh section is kind of long with a lot of human encounters. Many of the early encounters are pretty similar to each other, but all are all still decent encounters in their own right, even if a bit forgettable. What's not forgettable is Henry and Sam. This duo is a tragic story. It doesn't help that the game's writing and presentation makes you really like these characters. The group's relationship started a bit rocky, but by the end, right before Sam turns, it's pretty clear that there's friendship between the four of them. Joel and Henry laugh together, Ellie stole a toy for Sam obviously has a crush on Ellie, and the four are all talking about a future together. Their goals align and it finally seems like something good is going to happen. But of course not. Sam got bit and Henry couldn't take the loss. In this world, people are gone in an instant. You can never take anything for granted. Every encounter with the infected is one mistake, one surprise, or one stroke of bad luck away from getting you bit. That is the reality of their world. Henry's goal in life was to protect his brother and get his brother a better life. So when his brother turns and he has to shoot him, He freaks out. Henry turns the gun on Joel for a moment and Joel tries to make him chill. During these moments, Henry's mind is racing. His mind is filled with shock, fear, anger, hopelessness, sadness, despair. Sam was the only thing Henry had left in this world. And with him gone, and no less by Henry's own hand, he takes himself out as well. Henry has the most severe reaction to loss out of anyone in part 1, but he isn't unique. All over the world of The Last of Us, you come across a few different suicided corpses. If you choose to explore and find the collectibles nearby the body, you'll end up finding that most people in the world of The Last of Us take their life for one of two reasons. They got bit, or they lost all of their loved ones. Now please, let me say, if you struggle with thoughts of taking your own life, please talk to someone you trust. These topics can be upsetting for many, and if it's something you struggle with, please get help. No matter what loss or pain you've gone through, the world is a better place with you here. Henry makes the choice that he has nothing left to live for at the end of this section, and it's heartbreaking. Their story is the saddest part of The Last of Us Part 1. From the end of Henry and Sam's story, we next cut to Joel and Ellie close to Jackson, Wyoming. It's been a bit since the tragedy, and they've managed to make it to the area that Joel's brother Tommy lives in. Tommy used to be a member of the Fireflies, but quit a few years back. Since then, he's been building up a community. Tommy's managed to find some trustworthy people in this world and has started to make Jackson a survivor's paradise. It's by no means perfect. Tommy mentions how bandits try to raid their town sometimes, and of course the infected are still an issue to deal with. But Tommy is trying to create a stable, somewhat safe life for those around him in their little town. Currently, they're trying to fix the hydraulic dam in order to get their town some electricity. This is where Joel and Tommy are reunited. Tommy and Joel catch up for a bit, and Joel and Ellie get to meet Tommy's wife. They just recently got married, in fact. The group splits up, with Tommy's wife taking Ellie to get some food while Joel goes with Tommy to start up the dam. After starting the dam and then helping fight off more bandits, Joel has a talk with Tommy. Joel needed to find Tommy in order to find the Fireflies. But it's a bit more than that. He also wants Tommy to take Ellie there. Tommy's against this idea because he has his new life here with his now blossoming family. After convincing, he tells Joel he'll talk with his wife. Ellie gets a whiff of what's going on and steals a horse and runs away. So Joel and Tommy go after her. They find her just chilling at an old ranch. Joel and Ellie have a talk upstairs and it's pretty hard to watch. Ellie pours her heart out to Joel about how she wants him to take her because she finally feels safe around someone. That's all well and good until Ellie brings up Joel's dead daughter. Ellie says to Joel that she is not her. It's clear that Ellie is trying to ease some of Joel's worries, but she still hits a button. Joel states clearly to Ellie that she is in fact not his daughter and he is not her dad. The pair does not have any time to address this bombshell because the ranch wasn't abandoned and they're now under attack. Once that's dealt with, Tommy, Joel, and Ellie all leave and head back. They ride back in silence, and when they get to the dam, Joel asks Tommy if he can take the horse. He says yes to Joel and has Ellie hop on. His heart changed during the ride back. To be honest, earlier in this section when Joel is asking Tommy to take Ellie, it seems like he's also trying to convince himself that Tommy should take Ellie, so it's not a surprise when Joel's heart changes. The main point of this section is the solidification of Joel and Ellie's relationship. After their talk and on the ride home, Joel comes to realize that he can't trust this kid in anyone else's hands but his own. That father-daughter bond that's been building finally starts to take hold. It's been building this entire time, but Joel has finally come to accept it. It might seem that this section is more of a transitional section, and it is. There are only 3 or 4 encounters in this section, and it clearly serves as a character-focused portion. While all of that is true, don't be deceived. The section might lack a brutal character death, but it still works to emphasize the themes set up throughout. Tommy's wife is very against Tommy taking Ellie because she's worried he might die on the dangerous journey, and Tommy is worried for the same reasons. Neither Tommy nor his wife really want to risk what they've found in this dark, dark world. Tommy eventually agrees to go, but Tommy's wife makes it clear to Joel that if something happens to him, it's on Joel, and she's still not happy about it. This is more subtle and much less obvious than Henry blowing his brains out after losing Sam, but this is another example of the characters grappling with loss. Tommy's wife would rather have her husband than have him take Ellie to the Fireflies and lose his life along the way. She only ends up half-heartedly agreeing because it's clear that this is something that's important to Tommy. While Tommy and his wife are pretty subtle with their relationship to the theme of loss, Ellie just says it. When talking to Joel in the ranch house, Ellie outright tells Joel that she can't have someone leave her again. She finally feels safe with someone and is holding on to that with her dear life. It's part of the reason why Joel's words that he says later in the conversation are so hurtful. There are elements of the other themes as well, but this was the main point I wanted to bring up in this section. We're nearing the end of the game here, and these last two sections are kind of mirrors of each other. And like a lot of things, we'll get to that. We really need the full picture of these sections to talk about that. First off, Colorado. Tommy told Joel and Ellie that the Fireflies were located at a university in Colorado. Specifically, the university is just outside of Denver. This section starts on horseback and at the entrance of the university. The areas here are really pretty. The school is overgrown and run down, yet still has this beauty to it. There are a few infected encounters here, but none of them are too crazy. I really like the encounters here. I remembered each one, and I think they're built pretty well. I especially love the encounter where you have to sneak past the idle bloater. Good stuff. After a bit of exploring and kind of just enjoying the environment, it becomes apparent that this place is very, very quiet. Joel and Ellie start to worry that there are no fireflies here. Once they make it to the building Tommy told them about, they work their way through the floors and find no one. In the process though, they do learn that the group moved to Salt Lake City, Utah. They don't have much time to chill though, because another group happens to be looting the building they're in and the pair gets shot at. From here are a few human encounters, and then suddenly, Joel falls off a ledge during the fighting and lands on a protruding piece of rebar. It goes right through him. Ellie helps get Joel up and the two run to their horse as fast as possible, which is pretty slow. Joel's very hurt and he limps slowly along. All the while, enemies rush you and you have to shoot them down in order to get out of the building. Once on the horse, they GTFO and Joel passes out from blood loss. Cut to a month or two later. It's winter now and Ellie managed to get Joel into a house and she stitched up his wounds. But Joel is dying. His wound is infected and his body is not fighting it off very well. With Joel bandaged in the basement, it's up to Ellie to try to save him and gather what food she can. Ellie manages to kill a deer, but unfortunately, some other humans get to the body before she can. The pair of hunters seems reasonable at least and offer a deal. They understand that Ellie had shot the deer with an arrow and had been tracking it for ages, so they ask to trade for it. Ellie asks for medicine in trade for the deer's body, so one of the hunters leaves to get the medicine while the other one stays behind. The old factory that the group was hunkered down in is not free from infected, however. Infected rush the area and Ellie has to work with the hunter to fight off the incoming infected. Once that is taken care of, the other hunter returns with the medicine, and the hunter Ellie was working with reveals something. These two men are a part of the group that encountered Joel and Ellie back at the university. Despite this, they let Ellie leave without a fight. Ellie gets the fuck out of there and heads back to Joel where she shoots him up with antibiotics. Unfortunately for Ellie, the hunters followed her. Their goal was to follow Ellie so they could get revenge on Joel as well. Ellie sees them before they get to the house she's hiding in, so Ellie gets on the horse and rides off to draw them away from the area so Joel can heal. This section is super great. The encounters all carry a really tense tone to them. Well sure, if you die, you can just try the encounter again, but the stakes in the story at this point are high and the game does a great job of helping you feel those stakes. During this section, Ellie's horse is killed and she is eventually captured. She's not killed, the group's leader wants Ellie, probably not for great reasons, so they lock Ellie up in the room where they cut up people. Yeah, this is a group of cannibals. I love that they're cannibals. It's another super dark reality that would exist in their world. With the world the way it is, it's no surprise that in the 20 years the infected have roamed the earth, that some groups would turn to cannibalism. Just really good world building. Ellie is obviously disgusted by what they're doing and is not listening to anything the leader has to say. In the meantime, Joel wakes up. The antibiotics have been able to reduce his infection and at least break his fever. The area is still being searched by the enemy group, and after some fighting, Joel's able to capture a couple of men and find out where the group is located and holding Ellie. Cut back to Ellie and she just fucking breaks the cannibal leader's finger. So the guy's like, fine, alright. If I can't have you, then we'll eat you. Him and another member grab Ellie and set her on the chopping block and are about to chop her up when Ellie bites the leader and tells him she's infected. She uses her old bite mark as proof. While the group is distracted, Ellie is able to get her hands on the meat cleaver that was going to be used on her and uses it on them instead. Off Ellie runs into the snow. This section has you play through a few encounters in the town until a final boss fight against the creepy cannibal boss. Super cool fight. You have to sneak around the diner while avoiding debris in order to get behind and stab the boss. After the fight, Joel makes it to the town and is able to help Ellie get out. Honestly, this is probably my favorite section overall in The Last of Us Part 1. This section is just so good. Just a chapter or two ago, we had Ellie and Joel's relationship really solidify into something, and now, a couple of months later, the world is trying to take that away. Ellie has to fight to keep Joel on this earth. She's had to get them shelter, tend to Joel's wounds, find them food, and all of this is during the Colorado winter. Truth is, Ellie could have left Joel. She might not know where Salt Lake City is right now, but she at least knows where to go. It would not be impossible to find a map in Denver and the surrounding areas. And then from there, it's just a matter of crossing the distance from Denver to Salt Lake. Obviously, it would be a shitty thing to do even if Ellie and Joel didn't have the relationship that they had. But sometimes in this world, shitty things are your only option. My point here is that in the world of The Last of Us, if you want to live, sometimes you're going to have to make sacrifices and even kill in cold blood. Leaving your likely mortally injured partner for your own survival is something that people have had no doubt had to do in this world. But Ellie makes the other choice. She hunkers down and fights for Joel. The cannibalism section is also really awesome. Cannibalism grosses me the fuck out, and watching them chop up bodies was really unsettling. The tone of this entire portion is very tense, the boss fight especially. The lead cannibal is really good at stealth, just like you, so by the end of the fight you really have to track his location. I also really like that Ellie does 99% of her own saving. Ellie is never a static character, and it's one of the reasons that she's so great. All of the cutscenes and character interactions show Ellie's desperation in this section. Like the moment she learns that the cannibals would be willing to trade her some medicine. Her response is quick and frantic, and it's clear that she really wants those meds. Like I said, this section is really kind of a mirror to the final section. In this section, we had a more upbeat first half that ended in a climactic moment, which was Joel getting stabbed by a rebar. Then, in the latter half, we have one of the characters fighting like hell to keep the other one alive. In this section, that's Ellie nursing Joel back to health and getting the medicine. The mirroring of these sections feels very intentional. In writing, you need to show things to your audience instead of just telling them. So that's what they do. The whole game, Joel and Ellie's relationship has been progressing, and it really becomes concrete in Jackson. So, to capitalize on the relationship they've been building up between these two characters, Naughty Dog makes sure to show us how much each character cares for the other one. So what about that second section then? The last section of The Last of Us takes place in Salt Lake City, Utah. I have kind of a weird connection with all of the last sections in The Last of Us Part 1. I used to do event setup and spent a few months in Jackson, Wyoming doing weddings. Jackson, Wyoming is where Tommy's section takes place. Then I actually lived in Denver for a summer. It was supposed to be longer, but then housing got complicated, but that's a different story. I lived about 20 minutes from the location that Ellie's section would have taken place at. And then finally, I was born and raised in Utah, just north of Salt Lake City. It's honestly really cool to see Salt Lake in The Last of Us. The highway Joel and Ellie are walking on is literally the highway I've driven up and down my entire life. Utah is kind of a flyover state in many ways, and most people only know Utah for Mormons. It's not really seen in media much. I'm sure any of you watching who live in Idaho or North Dakota or somewhere similar can relate to that. It feels really cool to see the place I grew up in depicted in a video game. I especially love that the city is so run down. I'm no longer Mormon, I haven't been for a few years, but it's still cool to see the Salt Lake City Mormon temple overgrown in the background of the city. It's an iconic landmark for my state, and it's really cool to see. My little tangent aside, this section can be tough. Being the end of the game, encounters get a bit harder. In some of the easier encounters, you could get away with being lazy. Maybe just stealth kill one enemy, then just go melee the fuck out of the 1 or 2 runners left in the area. But for the Salt Lake section, there are not very many opportunities to play carelessly. For example, one encounter consists of 3 bloaters, 5 clickers, and like 8 runners. There is no way to brute force this. You have to play smart and use the tools you have to make it out. I did play on hard, so on lower difficulties there will be less infected in the area, but regardless, this encounter and the ones after really act like a final test. While trying to make their way to the hospital, the pair falls into some rushing water. Joel manages to grab Ellie and get them out of the water, but Joel quickly goes right back to sleep when the Fireflies see them and take Joel out. That does seem a bit aggressive, but the Fireflies had no clue who Joel and Ellie are, so for their safety, neutralizing Joel was the correct choice. The Fireflies do figure out who they are though and take the pair to the hospital where Joel wakes up. Joel is told that Ellie is already in the operating room. They will be able to pull the mutated infection out of her in order to create a vaccine, but it will kill her in the process. See, the infection takes effect by growing on the victim's brainstem. In Ellie's case, it mutated and instead gave her an immunity to future infection. If you know anything about the human brain, then you know that the brainstem is extremely important. It's no surprise that the surgery is going to kill her. Marlene is one of the leaders of the Fireflies and has helped raise Ellie before she joined up with Joel. Despite this, she still tells Joel that Ellie losing her life is for the greater good. I do want to touch on the ethics of what's going down here. We'll talk about what Joel's about to do later, but what about Marlene's actions? So Ellie and Joel fall in the water. Ellie kinda drowns and is passed out when the Fireflies find them. Then, based on the story's ending, it's clear that Ellie was passed out the entire way to the hospital and then immediately sent to surgery. Isn't that a little fucked? Ellie has stated before that even if the operation kills her, she wants to do it. I'm sure this is a conversation she and Marlene have had done before in the past, and Ellie could have easily consented back then. But either way, shouldn't they at least wake her up again and ask? In this world, there really isn't any time for ethics, but I did want to touch on this. Marlene has a soldier escort Joel out of the building because she can tell that he might try something to stop the surgery. She gives the man full orders to kill Joel if need be. Joel, of course, is not going to lose another daughter, so he manages to kill the guard and his rampage begins. These final sections are just like that of the final infected encounter. The game's going to test you. You're given an assault rifle in this part of the game, but that doesn't mean you can just go in guns blazing. You still have to use everything you've learned throughout the game in those dark hospital corridors. After slaughtering your way through dozens of men, Joel makes it to the operating room. He caps the doctor, grabs his daughter, and starts to run. Marlene manages to get to Joel and Ellie before they leave the building, and she tries to talk reason into Joel. Joel's not having it and shoots her as well, steals one of the Fireflies' cars, and starts driving back to Tommy's. Ellie wakes up from the surgery gases when they're on their way and asks what the hell happened. And Joel lies right to her face. He tells her that there were actually dozens like her, and they couldn't make a cure from people like her. So, the Fireflies turned them away. This doesn't quite sit with Ellie. The final scene in the game is Joel and Ellie making it back to Jackson when Ellie asks Joel one more time if he's being honest with her. And Joel lies again, and the credits roll. I bet you can see the similarities between these two sections. In this final portion, Joel and Ellie make it to their goal. However, it turns out the cost is greater than Joel is willing to pay. Ellie would pay it, but not Joel. Joel's been in a kind of denial during parts of their journey together. Specifically, I'm thinking back to Jackson when he was trying to get Tommy to take Ellie for him. Their conversations sounded to me like Joel was trying to convince himself that Tommy should take Ellie. Joel just couldn't accept that he was starting to care for this kid like his own daughter. He did not want a repeat of what happened before. After the events of Jackson and before the tragedy at Colorado, it finally feels like the walls have fallen down between the pair. Joel still avoids some subjects. For example, Ellie asks Joel about his divorce before the outbreak, and he just straight up says, "We're not talking about that." And that's okay. What I mean is the energy between the pair is much more relaxed. In the past, there was a subtle tenseness to all of their encounters with each other. Ellie would frequently piss off Joel, and Joel really didn't trust Ellie for a while and treated her like a kid more than she really deserved. But now, thanks to all they've been through, each character has a deeper understanding and connection with the other character. Joel's character's journey accumulates at that climactic hospital scene. In the past, Joel's told Ellie that he's not her dad, but that is no more. Joel's daughter is on that operating table and is about to be cut into, and he is not going to have that. So Joel, just like Ellie did in the chapter before, fights, and he fights hard. Joel slaughters dozens of guards, Marlene, the doctors, and even ruins the world's chance at a vaccine, all to save his daughter. This is what people love The Last of Us for. It's such an incredible journey. So what about my damn video title then? What is the point of The Last of Us? The clear focus is Joel and Ellie's relationship and watching it develop over the course of the game, but is that the point? Sure, to a degree it is. It definitely makes up a large portion of the core of the game, but I don't think that's the point. We've mentioned and touched on various concepts and themes throughout the video that I kept saying we'd circle back to. Well, it's finally time. Each character and section work to emphasize some specific themes. Some of those themes are fear, desperation, hope, loss, survival, and fighting for the ones you love. All of these themes work together to create the point of The Last of Us. And the point of The Last of Us is how people deal with and respond to loss. The game begins with a warmer and gentler Joel, and then his daughter is brutally taken from him. Then for the next 20 years, Joel is constantly fighting for survival and presumably loses many other friends and family members. Joel's relationship and reaction to Tess's death is a clear indication of what the world's done to him. Him and Tess have a close relationship, and while we don't necessarily know their history, there is some sexual tension and some dialogue in more relaxed scenes. However, Joel has 1.5 million walls up, and it seems that Tess does as well. In this world, people die and people die a lot, so these hardened survivors have found it easier to keep some barriers between them and others. We see this emotional detachment in Joel when Tess dies. Joel couldn't have done anything to prevent or stop Tess's death because she was bit by an infected runner, but his response is still a clear indication. He just moves forward and moves on. Ellie tries to talk to Joel about this, and it upsets him, and he tells Ellie to forget about it and move on. You don't have time to grieve in this world. Bill fits this accumulation of themes as well. Bill's partner/boyfriend leaves him, and in response, he further self-isolates and lays traps to keep everyone out. When you discover Bill's partner's body, there's a different tone to Bill's voice. Kind of like this is what he expected. We never get to see or meet Bill before this, but to me, Bill seemed more than just an asshole who wanted to be left alone. Bill felt like he was lashing out on top of being an asshole. The entire section, you assume he's just an angry hermit, and then at the very end, you find his dead boyfriend. Then you kind of understand a bit more. It suddenly becomes unclear what anger was from Bobby and what anger was from the loss of his partner. Sam and Henry have lost their whole family except for each other. They've had to deal with that loss by relying on and trusting each other. Sam was Henry's reason to live. Getting his brother a better life was all he really wanted. So when Sam's bit and Henry has to shoot him, he has no other reason to live. The loss of his brother is a loss that he just cannot bear, so he turns the gun on himself and removes himself from this cruel world. Tommy and his wife, to me, are shining examples of how to respond to loss. Tommy, like everyone else still alive, lost his normal life. They lost safety, they lost electricity and other comforts, and most importantly, they lost community. Tommy's response to all of this is to fight to get that old life back. He first joins the Fireflies and tries to change the system through that group, but he eventually leaves and builds his own paradise with his budding family. He finds people and accepts them into their community where people trust and work together. The Jackson section is very relaxed. There's only 1 or 2 encounters and they're all very easy. The environments here are brighter and warmer and the tone is generally softer. The game devs want Jackson to feel like safety. Tommy's response to the loss of normal life was to fight for that life back, and so far he's succeeding. The first 3 sections, we watch characters deal with explicit loss. Joel loses Tess, Bill loses his partner, and Henry loses Sam. Each character has a different reaction, from pushing down the feelings, to self-isolation, to suicide. So we've spent the game seeing people react to loss, and then we get to see this much healthier example. So finally, the game is going to show us what someone will do to avoid loss. We've been watching Joel and Ellie grow together, and that's what drives them in their respective sections to fight to keep the other one alive. Joel and Ellie's journey together is the focus of the story, but the point of The Last of Us is to explore how people respond to loss and what lengths they'll go through to avoid it. The climax is not Joel and Ellie solidifying their relationship. That takes about 4 sections before the end of the game. The climax is Joel going goblin mode to save his daughter, because that is the point of the game. Now I do want to talk about the final cutscene before we wrap up, because it does something that I think is pretty important to mention. The entire game, with the exception of when he was incapacitated, you only play as Joel because Joel is the main character. That's why I made a fit about making it clear at the start of the video. We played as Joel because we were playing through Joel's story. But now at the very end of the game, when Ellie asks Joel if he is telling the truth about the Fireflies, the game has you play as Ellie. Joel's story is complete. His character arc is done. Through his fatherly role he's taken, he's found a reason to really live again, and his old self comes out again. So now, it's Ellie's turn. The reason why I wanted to bring this up at the end here was because in order to really fully explore the point of The Last of Us, we have a whole nother game to talk about. The themes set up in part 1 are even more prevalent in part 2, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people missed the point of part 2. Part 2 had a lot of controversy, and a lot of it was stupid as hell. I unfortunately think people got wrapped up in the reactionary thoughts that surrounded Last of Us Part 2 and chose to skip the game. Others hated it for LGBTQ characters, and if you're one of those, you're a fucking clown. Make sure to subscribe to see when my video on part 2 goes up. It's gonna be a hot one. It's gonna come out in 2 weeks at the end of October. Thanks for watching. Give your friends head and have a great day. Hey, did you like this video? Well, check out my video on Control. Control's a haunting game where you play as Jesse Faden exploring a secret government facility while fighting off a psychic enemy called the Hiss. Perfect for October.
Don't you worry, it'll be okay.